The Romantic Young Lady, a short story by Somerset Maugham. One of the many inconveniences of real life is that it seldom gives you a complete story. Some incident has excited your interest. The people who are concerned in it are in the devil's own muddle, and you wonder what on earth will happen next. Well, generally nothing happens. The inevitable catastrophe you foresaw wasn't inevitable after all, and high tragedy, without any regard to artistic decency, dwindles into drawing-room comedy. Now, growing old has many disadvantages, but it has this compensation, among, let us admit, not a few others, that sometimes it gives you the opportunity of seeing what was the outcome of certain events you had witnessed long ago. You had given up the hope of ever knowing what was the end of the story, and then, when you least expected it, it is handed to you on a platter. These reflections occurred to me when, having escorted the Marquesa de San Esteban to her car, I went back into the hotel and sat down again in the lounge. I ordered a cocktail, lit a cigarette, and composed myself to order my recollections. The hotel was new and splendid. It was like every other first-class hotel in Europe, and I had been regretting that for the sake of its modern plumbing, I had deserted the old-fashioned, picturesque Hotel de Madrid, to which I generally went when I stayed in Seville. It was true that from my hotel I had a view of the noble river, the Guadalquivir, but that did not make up for the thés dansants that filled the bar lounge 2 or 3 days a week, with a fashionable crowd whose exuberant conversation almost drowned the strident din of a jazz orchestra. I had been out all the afternoon, and coming in found myself in the midst of a seething mob. I went to the desk and asked for my key so that I might go straight up to my room. But the porter, handing it to me, said that a lady had been asking for me. For me? She wants to see you very much. It's the Marquesa de San Esteban. I knew no one of that name. It must be some mistake. As I said the words, looking rather vaguely around, a lady came up to me with outstretched hands and a bright smile on her lips. To the best of my knowledge, I had never seen her before in my life. She seized my hands, both of them, and shook them warmly. She spoke in fluent French. How very nice to see you again after all these years. I saw by the paper that you were staying here, and I said to myself, I must look him up. How many years is it since we danced together? I daren't think. Do you still dance? I do. And I'm a grandmother. I'm fat, of course. I don't care. And it keeps me from getting fatter. She talked with such a rush that it took my breath away to listen to her. She was a stout, more than middle-aged woman, very much made up, with dark red hair, obviously dyed, cut short, and she was dressed in the height of Parisian fashion, which never suits Spanish women very well. But she had a gay, fruity laugh that made you feel you wanted to laugh too. It was quite obvious that she thoroughly enjoyed life. She was a fine figure of a woman, and I could well believe that in youth she had been beautiful. But I could not place her. Come and drink a glass of champagne with me, and we will talk of old times. Or will you have a cocktail? Our dear old Seville has changed, you see. These dansants and cocktails. It's just like Paris and London now. We've caught up. We're a civilized people. She led me to a table near the space where they were dancing, and we sat down. I could not go on pretending I was at ease. I thought I should only get into a fearful mess. It's terribly stupid of me, I'm afraid, I said, but I don't seem able to remember ever having known anyone of your name in the old days in Seville. San Esteban, she interrupted before I could go on. Naturally, my husband came from Salamanca. He was in the diplomatic service. I'm a widow. You knew me as Pilar Carreon. Of course, having my hair red changes me a little. But otherwise, I don't think I've altered much. Not at all, I said quickly. It was only the name that bothered me. Of course, now I remembered her, but I was concerned at the moment only with the effort to conceal from her the mingled consternation and amusement that filled me, as I realized that the Pilar Carreon I had danced with at the Countess de Marbella's parties and at the fair had turned into this stout, flaunting dowager. I could not get over it. But I had to watch my step. I wondered if she knew how well I recollected the story that had shaken Seville to its foundations, and I was glad when, after she had finally bidden me an effusive farewell, I was able to recall it at ease. In those days, 40 years ago, Seville had not become a prosperous commercial city. It had quiet, white streets, paved with cobbles, with a multitude of churches on the belfries of which storks built their nests. Bullfighters, students and loungers sauntered in the sierpes all day long. Life was easy. This, of course, was before the time of motor cars, and the Sevillans would live in penury, practicing every possible economy in order to have a carriage. For this luxury, he was willing to sacrifice the necessities of life. Everyone who had any claim to gentility drove up and down the Delicias, the park-like gardens by the Guadalquivir, every blessed afternoon from 5 till 7. You saw carriages of all sorts, from fashionable London Victorias to old broken-down shays that seemed as though they would fall to pieces, magnificent horses and wretched hacks whose tragic end in the bull-ring was near at hand. But there was one equipage that could not fail to attract the stranger's attention. It was a Victoria, very smart and new, drawn by 2 beautiful mules, and the coachman and the footman wore the national costume of Andalusia in pale grey. It was the most splendid turnout Seville had ever known, and it belonged to the Countess de Marbella. She was a Frenchwoman married to a Spaniard, who had enthusiastically adopted the manners and customs of her husband's country, but with a Parisian elegance that gave them a peculiar distinction. The rest of the carriages went at a snail's pace so that their occupants could see and be seen, but the Countess, behind her mules, dashed up between the 2 crawling lines at a fast trot, went to the end of the Delicias and back twice, and then drove away. The proceeding savoured somewhat of royalty. When you looked at her gracefully seated in that swift Victoria, her head handsomely poised, her hair of too brilliant a gold to be natural, you did not wonder that her French vivacity and determination had given her the position she held. She made the fashion. Her decrees were law. But the Countess had too many adorers not to have as many enemies, and the most determined of these was the widowed Duchess de Dos Palos, whose birth and social consequence made her claim as a right the first place in society which the Frenchwoman had won by grace, wit, and character. Now the Duchess had an only daughter. This was Dona Pilar. She was 20 when I first knew her, and she was very beautiful. She had magnificent eyes and a skin that, however hard you tried to find a less hackneyed way to describe it, you could only call peach-like. She was very slim, rather tall for a Spanish girl, with a red mouth and dazzlingly white teeth. She wore her abundant, shining black hair dressed very elaborately in the Spanish style of the period. She was infinitely alluring. The fire in her black eyes, the warmth of her smile, the seductiveness of her movements suggested so much passion that it really wasn't quite fair. She belonged to the generation which was straining to break the old conventions that had kept the Spanish girl of good family hidden away till it was time for her to be married. I often played tennis with her, and I used to dance with her at the Countess de Marbella's parties. The Duchess considered the Frenchwoman's parties, with champagne and a sit-down supper, ostentatious, and when she opened her own great house to society, which was only twice a year, it was to give them lemonade and biscuits. But she bred fighting bulls, as her husband had done, and on the occasions when the young bulls were tried out, she gave picnic luncheons to which her friends were asked, very gay and informal, but with a sort of feudal state which fascinated my romantic imagination. Once, when the Duchess's bulls were to fight at a corrida in Seville, I rode in with them at night as one of the men escorting Dona Pilar, dressed in a costume that reminded one of a picture by Goya, who headed the cavalcade. It was a charming experience to ride through the night, on those prancing Andalusian horses, with the 6 bulls surrounded by oxen thundering along behind. A good many men, rich or noble, and sometimes both, had asked Dona Pilar's hand in marriage, but, notwithstanding her mother's remonstrances, she had refused them. The Duchess had been married at 15, and it seemed to her really indecent that her daughter at 20 should be still single. The Duchess asked her what she was waiting for. It was absurd to be too difficult. It was her duty to marry. But Pilar was stubborn. She found reasons to reject every one of her suitors. Then the truth came out. During the daily drives in the Delicias, which the Duchess, accompanied by her daughter, took in a great old-fashioned landau, they passed the Countess as she was twice swiftly driven up and down the promenade. The ladies were on such bad terms that they pretended not to see one another, but Pilar could not keep her eyes off that smart carriage and the two beautiful grey mules, and not wishing to catch the Countess's somewhat ironic glance, her own fell on the coachman who drove her. He was the handsomest man in Seville, and in his beautiful uniform he was a sight to see. Of course, no one knew exactly what happened, but apparently the more Pilar looked at the coachman, the more she liked the look of him, and somehow or other, for all this part of the story remained a mystery, the pair met. In Spain, the classes are strangely mingled, and the butler may have in his veins much nobler blood than the master. Pilar learnt, not I think without satisfaction, that the coachman belonged to the ancient family of Leon, than which there is none in Andalusia more distinguished, and really so far as birth went, there was little to choose between them. Only her life had been passed in a ducal mansion, while fate had forced him to earn his living on the box of a Victoria. Neither could regret this, since only in that exalted place could he have attracted the attention of the most difficult young woman in Seville. They fell madly in love with one another. It so happened that just then a young man called the Marquesa de San Esteban, whom they had met at San Sebastian the summer before, wrote to the Duchess and asked for Pilar's hand in marriage. He was extremely eligible, and the two families had formed alliances from time to time ever since the reign of Philip II. The Duchess was determined not to stand any more nonsense, and when she told Pilar of the proposal, added that she had shilly-shallied long enough. She must either marry him or she should go into a convent. "I'm not going to do either the one or the other," said Pilar. "What are you going to do then? I have given you a home long enough." "I'm going to marry José Leon." "Who is he?" Pilar hesitated for a moment, and it is indeed to be hoped, that she blushed a little. "He's the Countess's coachman." "What Countess?" "The Countess de Marbella." I remembered the Duchess well, and I am sure that when roused she stuck at little. She raged, she implored, she cried, she argued. There was a terrific scene. People said that she slapped her daughter and pulled her hair. But I have an impression that Pilar in such a pass was capable of hitting back. She repeated that she loved José Leon, and he loved her. She was determined to marry him. The Duchess called a family council. The matter was put before them, and it was decided that to save them all from disgrace, Pilar should be taken away to the country and kept there till she had recovered from her infatuation. Pilar got wind of the scheme and put a stop to it by slipping out of the window of her room one night, when everyone was asleep, and going to live with her lover's parents. They were respectable persons who inhabited a small apartment on the unfashionable side of the Guadalquivir in the quarter called Triana. After that, no concealment was possible. The fat was in the fire, and the clubs along the Sierpes buzzed with the scandal. Waiters were kept busy bringing trays of little glasses of manzanilla to the members from the neighbouring wine shops. They gossiped and laughed over the scandal, and Pilar's rejected suitors were the recipients of many congratulations. What an escape! The Duchess was in despair. She could think of nothing better to do than go to the Archbishop, her trusted friend and former confessor, and beg him himself to reason with the infatuated girl. Pilar was summoned to the episcopal palace, and the good old man, used to intervening in family quarrels, did his utmost to show her the folly of her course. But she would not be persuaded. Nothing that anyone could say would induce her to forsake the man she loved. The Duchess, waiting in an adjoining room, was sent for and made a final appeal to her daughter. In vain. Pilar returned to her humble lodging, and the Duchess in tears was left alone with the Archbishop. The Archbishop was no less astute than he was pious, and when he saw that the distracted woman was in a fit state to listen to him, advised her as a last resource to go to the Countess de Marbella. She was the cleverest woman in Seville, and it might be that she could do something. At first, the Duchess indignantly refused. She would never suffer the humiliation of appealing to her greatest enemy. Sooner might the ancient house of Dos Palos fall in ruin. The Archbishop was accustomed to dealing with tiresome women. He set himself with gentle cunning to induce her to change her mind, and presently she consented to throw herself on the Frenchwoman's mercy. With rage in her heart, she sent a message asking if she might see her, and that afternoon was ushered into her drawing-room. The Countess, of course, had been one of the first to hear the story, but she listened to the unhappy mother as though she had not known a thing about it. She relished the situation enormously. It was the crowning triumph to have the vindictive Duchess on her knees before her. But she was at heart a good-natured woman, and she had a sense of humour. "It's a most unfortunate situation," she said, "and I'm sorry that one of my servants should be the occasion of it. But I don't exactly see what I can do." The Duchess would have liked to slap her painted face, and her voice trembled a little with the effort she made to control her anger. "It is not for my own sake I'm asking you to help. It's for Pilar's. I know, we all know, that you are the cleverest woman in the city. It seemed to me, it seemed to the Archbishop, that if there was a way out, your quick wit would find it." The Countess knew she was being grossly flattered. She did not mind. She liked it. "You must let me think. Of course, if he'd been a gentleman, I could have sent for my son, and he would have killed him. But the Duke of Dos Palos cannot fight a duel with the Countess de Marbella's coachman. Perhaps not. In the old days, it would have been so simple. I should merely have hired a couple of ruffians and had the brute's throat cut one night in the street. But with all these laws they have nowadays, decent people have no way of protecting themselves from insult. I should deplore any method of settling the difficulty that deprived me of the services of an excellent coachman," murmured the Countess. "But if he marries my daughter, he cannot continue to be your coachman," cried the Duchess indignantly. "Are you going to give Pilar an income for them to live on?" "Me? Not a peseta. I told Pilar at once that she should get nothing from me. They can starve for all I care." "Well, I should think rather than do that, he will prefer to stay on as my coachman. There are very nice rooms over my stables." The Duchess went pale. The Duchess went red. "Forget all that has passed between us. Let us be friends. You can't expose me to such a humiliation. If I've ever done things to affront you, I ask you on my knees to forgive me." The Duchess cried. "Dry your eyes, Duchess," the Frenchwoman said at last. "I will do what I can." "Is there anything you can do?" "Perhaps. Is it true that Pilar has and will have no money of her own?" "Not a penny if she marries without my consent." The Countess gave one of her brightest smiles. "There is a common impression that southern people are romantic and northern people matter-of-fact. The reverse is true. It is the northerners who are incurably romantic. I have lived long enough among you Spaniards to know that you are nothing if not practical." The Duchess was too broken to resent openly these unpleasant remarks. But oh, how she hated the woman. The Countess de Marbella rose to her feet. "You shall hear from me in the course of the day." She firmly dismissed her visitor. The carriage was ordered for 5 o'clock, and at 10 minutes to, the Countess, dressed for her drive, sent for José. When he came into the drawing-room, wearing his pale grey livery with such an air, she could not deny that he was very good to look upon. If he had not been her own coachman, well, it was not the moment for ideas of that sort. He stood before her, holding himself easily, but with a gallant swagger. There was nothing servile in his bearing. "A Greek god," the Countess murmured to herself. "It is only Andalusia that can produce such types." And then aloud, "I hear that you are going to marry the daughter of the Duchess of Dos Palos. If the Countess does not object." She shrugged her shoulders. "Whoever you marry is a matter of complete indifference to me. You know, of course, that Doña Pilar will have no fortune." "Yes, madam, I have a good place, and I can keep my wife. I love her." "I can't blame you for that. She is a beautiful girl." but I think it only right to tell you that I have a rooted objection to married coachmen. On your wedding day, you leave my service. That is all I had to say to you. You can go." She began to look at the daily paper that had just arrived from Paris, but José, as she expected, did not stir. He stared down at the floor. Presently the Countess looked up. "What are you waiting for?" "I never knew Madame would send me away," he answered in a troubled tone. "I have no doubt you'll find another place." "Yes, but—" "Well, what is it?" she asked sharply. He sighed miserably. "There's not a pair of mules in the whole of Spain to come up to ours. They're almost human beings. They understand every word I say to them." The Countess gave him a smile that would have turned the head of anyone who was not madly in love already. "I'm afraid you must choose between me and your betrothed." He shifted from one foot to the other. He put his hand to his pocket to get himself a cigarette, but then, remembering where he was, restrained the gesture. He glanced at the Countess, and that peculiar, shrewd smile came over his face, which those who have lived in Andalusia know so well. "In that case, I can't hesitate. Pilar must see that this alters my position entirely. One can get a wife any day of the week, but a place like this is found only once in a lifetime. I should be a fool to throw it up for a woman." That was the end of the adventure. José Leon continued to drive the Countess de Marbella, but she noticed when they sped up and down the Delicias that thenceforward as many eyes were turned on her handsome coachman as on her latest hat, and a year later Pilar married the Marquesa de San Esteban.